Welcome to Constant V, a live podcast of a writer's life. I'm your host, Vince Capps. That introductory song was Dr. Vray by the band Ergo Physmiz. Today is Sunday, August 21st, 2016. This is episode 2 of Peeling for Indigo. Indigo is the color of deep midnight sky. Psychology widely interprets indigo as being the color for great devotion, wisdom, justice, and fair-mindedness, or otherwise called impartiality. Most of all, indigo is the color for structure. It's the mind's eye, giving us the energy for deep change, or vicissitude. And this show is all about constant vicissitude, constant V. That to develop yourself creatively. In the last episode, we discussed the frontal lobe and how its early morning functions contribute to early morning risers' creative edge. But what makes creative people's brain work differently? I want to peel into that with an article by Quartz. It's called Creative People's Brains Really Do Work Differently by Carolyn Gregoire and Scotty Barry Kaufman. It's written on January the 4th, 2016. And it discusses how a psychologist at the University of Berkeley named Frank X. Barron conducted an experiment at the university at a frat house back in 1960. He invited Truman Capote, William Carlos Williams, Frank O'Connor, as well as leading architects, scientists, entrepreneurs, and mathematicians. So they're observing all of this bunch of creative geniuses socializing in a frat house while also conducting individual evaluations as well as IQ tests, thinking that these people's IQs actually had something to do with their creativity, right? But what they found was that IQ couldn't explain it because the scores were all over the place. Now, what they did find was a commonality in that they all scored high in the following psychological test parameters. And these are surprisingly all unscientific names. 1, openness to one's inner life. 2, a preference for complexity and ambiguity, or in other words, they were undecisive. 3, an unusually high tolerance for disorder and disarray. And 5, the ability to extract order from chaos. Most of the creatives were very independent, unconventional, and willing to take risk. I'm unsure how they exactly came upon those factors, but Frank X. Barron, the psychologist who is studying them, he described this hodgepodge as being both primitive and more cultured, more destructive and more constructive, occasionally crazier and yet adamantly saner than the average person. So why do you think this is anatomically so? It's because they have more of an active left hemisphere, maybe, or maybe a bigger frontal lobe, or maybe more electrical activity. But none of those were correct, or are correct. It turned out that the size of the brain or activity of a specific region of the brain causing more creativity or intellect was a big myth, because creativity draws from the entirety of the brain. A lot of it of what's called the medial, the inside surface of the four regions, which are the frontal, parietal, which is the middle, the temporal, which is the side, and then there's also a fourth region which really doesn't play any account of the creative aspect. It's called the occipital, which is the back region. The medial region is also, it's where we formulate most of our daydreaming. And in 2001, a neurologist coined this region as being a network that creates a self-generated cognition. It's only been 15 years since we discovered what is called the default mode network, or the imagination network. And this was coined by a neurologist named Marcus Raichle, spelled Raichle. Raichle discovered that the functions of the imagination network, the default mode network, form the core of the human experience. The functions of the imagination network, it says in this article, form the core of the human experience. Its three main components are personal meaning-making, mental simulation, and perspective-taking. This allows us to construct meanings from our experiences, remember the past, think about the future, imagine other people's perspectives and alternative scenarios, understand stories, and reflect on mental and emotional states, both our own and those of others. The imaginative and social processes associated with this brain network are also critical to developing compassion, as well as the ability to understand ourselves and construct a linear sense of self. It goes on to say that the imagination network doesn't work alone, and the creative brain is particularly good at flexibly activating and deactivating brain networks. And this allows this medial region to draw on a wide range of strengths, characteristics, and thinking styles during work. So in other words, this region, this reason for creativity is a dynamic interplay of emotions, unconscious and conscious processing. Some of it's intellectual, and some of it's morality. Has a lot to do with a person's morality. And because some people are more creative than others, perhaps maybe this medial region is more active than others, these people are more self-aware. Creatives, writers, they all have somewhat of a double-edged sword. So, in that we are able to have empathy, feel empathy perhaps more, we also are more aware of the dark sides of ourselves. And sometimes society sees that as being mentally ill. So, this is the reason why back in the mid-1900s, they gave people lobotomies. They said, let's cut the connection in the prefrontal cortex so that way your frontal lobe will be dysfunctional. And then you can be confused. You can be a smiling oyster and pour coffee from an empty pot maybe. But now we're learning to embrace our darkness. And we understand that with heightened creativity means every sense of emotion can hit Neptune or Uranus. And because our frontal lobe, which is the region I discussed in episode 2, the first part of Peeling for Indigo, because of the frontal lobe, you can also have a lot of deep worries, regrets, and even identity crisis. So, thank you for listening. I'd like to talk a little bit about the next episode. It's going to be called Turpentine Creek. There are going to be 2 parts. I'll discuss how editing can often lead to creativity, and how you have to love what you are in order to transform. You have to be free. And though we'll be live at 8 p.m. next Sunday, August 28th,